Thank you, Bret. Yeah, I'm sure there will be a lot of questions. First of all, I think the colleague will agree that that we need to identify emission reduction within our own state and operations. Can I ask if you got any data that where are we in terms of emission reduction within the councils? I think if we encourage public to follow the emission reduction plan, we must lead from front. You will agree, and I would like to know what is actually at the moment where we are within the council's department. For example, our buildings are energy efficient. Our transport is energy efficient. So
Yep.
so on.
So in terms of transport, we've been moving over to electric vehicles. The issue around transport is on the large vehicles, the sort of the waste refuse collection vehicles and the like. Now we're looking at electric versions of that, but we're also not ruling out hydrogen. And we're in conversations with Severn Trent, who are particularly interested in hydrogen because they also can actually, in a sense, produce that themselves as part of their processes. So there's opportunities for the synergies there. That one is still, in terms of being looked at, we're not clear of the answer as this as yet. As are most authorities in the UK. They're very costly, the electric units for the large vehicle fleet, and there might be other better alternatives, but we're currently reviewing that situation. So we are working. We've got Shamala, who's been working on the electric vehicles, and she's been looking at proposals in the north of the city, potential locations for fleet vehicle charging, but which is not only just for our fleet, but could be beneficial to private road hauliers and the like. So it's looking at how we develop that, and also systems where you actually charge the vehicles whilst they're on the move. So we're looking at that. That's more about the technology is not quite there yet, and we're learning about what's the most effective technology to use, because this is very costly. What we future investments in that area will be. So it's working out what is the best option. And we're still doing that in relation to those. But regards to the smaller fleet, we're moving at great strides in terms of dealing with that issue. The buildings, Lowell leads on the building side of the work. He could tell you in a lot more detail than me, but we are making great strides in doing that work. And the reference to the £6 million that we've got is about making improvements, putting solar on our roofs, for example. And one of our proposals with the EU funding is looking at how we can put solar on, not only on our roofs, but also rent space and put them on private companies' roofs to increase energy generation. So in terms of our buildings, a number of looking at our ratings in terms of our scope, we've shown significant improvements in terms of emissions reductions. But I have to put a caveat to that, because there's also a number of buildings that we no longer have that now parts of trusts and other organisations. So the question is, what are they doing with those buildings they have in terms of what changes they're making? And that's, again, gets to partnership working. So it's us working with other people to help them make improvements. But if you look at our records, and I can circulate certainly to councillors the figures of the change, illustrating the change over the years in terms of reduction of emissions from buildings.
Yeah, please do. Thank you. Yeah, Jim, your hand is up.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of build on that, because both myself and Cabinet Member for Education have recently taken Cabinet reports specifically in relation to retrofitting certain aspects of energy efficiency to our various buildings and estate across the city. And this was a fund that we bid to government, and we've been successful in achieving that. And I think that demonstrates our commitment there. And of course, the other thing is the standards to which we build new buildings. So Friargate 2 is now built to the highest standards that we can maintain, subject to the affordability. But I think we can demonstrate very, very well, actually, our commitment there. The other thing is we bought a number of electric taxis that the taxi firms can actually use for free as a trial to see how they work, and that again is showing the way. And of course, don't forget our energy from waste plants. You know, we were one of the first in the country to do this, and a number of our buildings, all of the buildings at Friargate, will be heated by that renewable energy coming from the energy from waste plant, and that's quite unique. There's very few places like that. So I think we can demonstrate that. But as I said right at the start, the council, if they become carbon zero tomorrow, it would have a very small effect in terms of the overall carbon dioxide emissions, both in the city but across the country. Something like 1% of all international emissions of CO2 comes from the UK. So you can imagine when you actually bring it down, what level of carbon dioxide emissions come from city council owned property, and then you extrapolate that to the city. You can see we're a very small cog in a huge wheel. But the key point is, as you say, Naim, is to show leadership, and I think we can very, very comfortably demonstrate that.
Thank you, Jim. Members, it's over to you now. Rupinder.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I first want to say the work Coventry City Council have done on, say, very light rail or gigabyte factory or battery plant. It is fantastic, and we have a specific officer appointed for this challenge, and that's really good. But I also have some questions on the things which have been presented. First one I want to find out is, if we were talking about the active travel and new infrastructure, is it possible that we are working on these things slowly, and whenever it's possible, is it possible to put some date on it, say by 2040, all main arteries of the Coventry's road will have a cycle lane? That kind of target, which will help us to, say, put something in writing, so every future plan we do will automatically get pointers that we are working towards this, that all these modifications or the reworking on roads should be designed in that fashion. Second thing I want to find out is if it's possible, I'm not sure if it is, that we can put some local levy on, say, big polluters or vehicles or people who use inefficient way of energy, and then that levy can be used to fund the public transport, because in the data you are showing is clear to me that public transport is the best way to go about achieving our targets, because walking and cycling is fantastic, and I do genuinely want people to do that. But we know it is not going to be the thing which people can use in all weather conditions. So public transport is a key to these things. I also want officers to expand on the 5 pathways which discussed, especially the third and the fourth one, which is circular economy. And I just want to know how they think it's going to work. A little bit more expansion on what you have said in that presentation. And resilient development pathway, what is going to work in this country? What idea do you have, and how do you see this going to work? One thing, another one is the retrofit of the housing for saving energies. I just want to know, I know I have spoken to the officer regarding this, and we are doing fantastic work with our main partners like Whitefire or Citizen Housing now. But I want to know what the landlords, which are private landlords, what we have in plan for those things. And last question is, what additional help we have in mind to help make the social enterprise flourish in the city, which is mentioned here, that this is one of the things which we want to do. I just want to know what kind of social additional help we have in mind. Okay, thank you. That's a lot of questions. Thank you.
Yeah, Bret, over to you.
Right, I'm trying to get this done.
Yeah.
Okay. The interest, can we set targets? So what you're referring to is targets in terms of cycle route development and whether we can assign targets to do that. I can have that conversation with Colin Knight. I'm pretty sure he does have some targets set already around routes. So, for example, we know going to the Walsgrave Hospital and other key routes, setting that up. One of the things that I've been involved in is looking as well at what's the response when we do it. So how can we measure the uptake in terms of cycling use? So we could put the routes in, but then what's the participation level and what things we need to do to encourage use of the routes once they're there. That's an interesting aspect. I'll certainly raise that with colleagues. I'm pretty sure that there will be targets that will be being set. It's a difficult thing because sometimes it's off the back of development that's we're working on as well. So there might be parts of Section 106 agreements and the like. So the opportunities when they arise, people then capitalise on them and develop them. So sometimes it's difficult to plan exact precise timings for these, but there's no harm in setting targets to do that. Can we put local levies from big polluters to subsidise public transport? There's one authority that I'm aware of that has done that a while ago. It introduced a levy on parking spaces in private companies that had car parks with more than 10 spaces in them, and they paid a levy towards that. And the levy that went from the parking allocations went into a fund which actually helped to subsidise the Nottingham's tram system. So there are kind of things out there which could be used and explored. Similarly, Lambeth had done something regarding vehicle permits and related it to Euro ratings of the vehicle. So to encourage people to get more recent vehicles which are less polluting, and those who are more polluting had a different differential charge. Now there's issues around that because that can impact on inequalities, because sometimes people on lower incomes are the ones that have the older vehicles, so they could be penalised for that. So this has to be handled sensitively, that kind of thing. But there are examples of those that exist. There's nothing being mooted within Coventry at the moment in relation to that, but those sorts of things do exist elsewhere if you chose to do that. The circular economy, well, we're currently doing quite a lot in relation to that with the two consultancy streams that we have. So Business Sustain and the Green Business Team work very closely with a lot of SMEs and larger companies on helping them to improve their environmental management, either to help them get ISO 14001 status, or helping them in terms of reducing their energy and fuel costs, or reducing their waste streams. So there's plenty of things which we're doing in terms of helping those companies from that point of view. But also there are the opportunities around potentially new products. And I mentioned earlier around one organisation that we've been in contact with recently at the university, linked to the University of Birmingham, is looking at how other companies' waste materials can be other companies' raw materials. So to minimise, thereby minimising waste. So it's things like creating networks and opportunities for that information sharing, providing consultancy and support, but also the opportunity for looking at business startups and innovation in creating new products, whether that's in the social enterprise sector or whether it's in relation to businesses operating commercially. Both examples you could deliver in both of those scenarios. So for example, with energy efficiency. We've been having conversations with Orbit Housing, who are being in touch with an organisation called Tin Social that potentially could be training and employing people to provide external lagging for premises. Now that would be an ideal opportunity if they could create premises and create a new product that are lower unit cost, that could be used by us when we're using our LADS funding and other things to do properties up. That'd be an ideal opportunity, but also it actually helps create jobs for local people. So there's things like that which are involved, and there are a number of organisations within the city that also support development of social enterprises. At Coventry University in particular, Coventry Warwickshire CDA, and also our own teams themselves do bits of work in this area. So it's very much about partnership working, as we mentioned earlier. So that kind of relates to the retrofit for housing. The social landlords, as I said, is a challenge. Private landlords, we haven't even started in that area as yet. That's an area where there's been recently been some discussion with colleagues in other authorities in the West Midlands. And it would be interesting to learn. I think Wolverhampton is trying to look at this as an issue, and we're keen to see what they're trying to do. It is a really difficult area because what's the incentive to the social landlord? It's how you incentivize those things in a way which gets them to take action, and that's I think something that the government itself is trying to address with its funding programs. Hopefully that covers your answers to your questions.
And just you answered all of them. Just the last one was, what additional help will be available for social enterprises? All right,
for social, right. Well, that we need to look at. We need to look at what happened in terms of there's potential opportunities. There's the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, for example, that funds programs. There's also National Lottery. I would envisage that it would be members of my team and others and partners, and Coventry University, which has got a social enterprise unit, for example, looking at where those opportunities exist and then putting in bids and proposals to put in some practical projects that would demonstrate how those things can be done. So like the Tin Social one would be a classic in that area. That to me would be exactly the sort of thing that we'd want to be putting forward to see if we can get secure funding to support the development of. There's no kind of core funding within the council for that sort of thing at the moment, but there is for business support. But it's a question as to whether what we do is social enterprise. So, but there certainly is opportunities, and there's plenty of other funding streams that we can use from central government and elsewhere.
Okay, thank you, Brad. Before I ask Linda to ask question, I think Jim raised his hand.
Yeah, thank you. It's really, to help with the answers to the questions, because some of the things that Rupinder's asked there are definitely policy, and it really wouldn't be for officers to go in and try and make policy on the hoof. And I'll give you one example, because Rupinder asked about public levy to polluters. Clearly, that would be the decision of the council following a lot of in-depth work and political conversation. Suffice it to say, you mentioned Nottingham, and Nottingham is a good example, because of course Nottingham do have a workplace levy for car parks, and that was brought in a number of years ago, and that was subject to their local plan and all the rest of it, and there's a whole host of things behind that. But it does have negatives around that, massive negatives. But it also has positives, because clearly they had a massive network of trams. We don't have that in the city. They had a much better integrated public transport system that we don't have in our city. We need to work on that. And the danger sometimes, depending on the size of the area, it can actually be a disincentive to companies, not a incentive, and in fact they'll walk away potentially, and that's always that balance, and that's a policy decision. And in my experience, and this is why I said it right at the outset, and by the way, Nottingham, as part of the air quality action plan that we've got, a number of cities up around the country, and of course these are separate from climate change. You have to remember that it's about sustainability, not about climate change. Clearly, Nottingham, one of the cities in the country, who were not asked to bring in an air quality action zone because they had this workplace levelling. They could demonstrate actually their emissions within set areas, etc. We can demonstrate as well, because of our plans around air quality action plan, that we've managed to rule out a charging zone. So that was really, really important for our city. But my experience is, and this is why we've got to work with them, our experience is businesses, I mentioned earlier on, we work with businesses to help support them to actually become sustainable and to become zero carbon as much as they can, improve their premises, improve their products. I work with a company who are an old-fashioned, in most people's eyes, engineering company, who are now building and installing electric vehicle charge points directly in our city because of our initiatives. They're going green and they're completely sustainable. And most companies want to move. The energy companies know they can't continue because of the announcements and the policies and the direction of the government, and therefore they're moving. And the job is to incentivise them and work with them. These are clever organisations who want to make money, but to make money, they've got to make it sustainable. Because if we shut off our energy companies today, we won't have any energy tomorrow, and that is always the balance. So I just wanted to put that context within it, Chair.
Thank you, Jim. Very helpful. I've got Linda, Catherine, and Kindy, and before that, David West's hand's gone up. David, are you going to come in now, or?
Very quickly, Chair, on the comment that Rupinder made around working with private landlords. I believe it was a question about private landlords. I just wanted to raise a point around the additional licensing scheme and some of the work that's going on there, because there are energy requirements within the additional licensing scheme and the mandatory licensing scheme that do help. Now, is it fantastic and amazing where it should be? No, it's not, but we're on early days with the additional licensing scheme. It is improving the standard of accommodation, and there is the potential. We're looking at the potential of actually increasing the rating that's required for the licensing scheme as well. So there's a lot of work going on there, and just another point around that I think is really, really positive. We've got an active landlords forum now where the council meet regularly with private landlords. And we've got conversations going on now that we didn't have before. We've actually got an in there that didn't exist, or to the same extent as it does now. So there's some really good, real positives going on around that work, and I think we'll certainly reap some reward in that regard too. I'm going to shut up now so other people can ask questions.
Thank you, David. And my understanding is that there is a requirement by the government now for the landlord to provide EPC to the tenants. And if the property is rated A to D, then it's okay to rent. But if it's less than D, then you can't rent that property to the to anyone. Linda, you are next.
Thank you very much, Chair. My question's got two elements regarding environmental inequality and biodiversity. And with regard to our air quality action plan and poor air quality, I wonder how this will fit in with the new environmental bill that is going through. It's at the report stage at the moment. And within that, what will be looked at, as well as poor air quality, is densification within poor air quality areas, and we do have that in my ward where the levels are particularly high. So just how far are we up to date with what's in the new environmental bill? The second element is we have another large river in Coventry, although it doesn't seem to appear very often in paperwork. It's the River Sow. And luckily, we have good Friends of the Parks groups, particularly in Longford, which look after that area. which is an area that experiences flooding as well. And because we're active, and declaring an interest, my husband is chair of the Friends of Longford Park. Because we're active, we know that we report issues and numbers and ratios to Warwickshire County Council. So if we want to record birds or amphibians or anything else, we report it to Warwick. And I just wondered why we haven't got that in Coventry itself, and wonder whether many people in the community know that they can record things at that recording office. And because we're part of the edge of the city, where we still have that element of green at the moment, although on our borders, green land, not green belt, but just green in itself is at risk. I wondered how we're looking at climate change with the recognition that cities need a green donut around them, something that cools the inner city, particularly for older people and for babies, because cities are becoming heated. So they're quite disparate, but that's my two issues. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Linda. Bret, over to you.
Yeah, so the Air Quality Action Plan relationship to the Environment Bill is wholly consistent with that. I mean, the Environment Bill is sort of building on that further. And there are some further developments which we're currently actually reviewing, which link to the smart cities, for example. So we're currently looking at use of carbon fiber for monitoring, not just looking at air quality, but relating it to vehicle movements and vehicle transport patterns. There's been a number of pilots that have been undertaken nationally, a number of authorities funded by DEFRA. We're in contact with them to learn from some of their experiences, but where they develop local networks, which then help to inform the way traffic's managed and layout design, etc., to minimise risks. That's a kind of a new development, I think, in this sort of kind of air quality management sphere, and it's one that's kind of Coventry itself is currently looking at and reviewing as I speak. So I've been getting various bits of correspondence with colleagues around that issue. So there's a definite link between the two. There's a clear understanding that's developing. We're trying to get a better picture about as the government is as well, around the new Environment Bill, what it's going to cover and not cover. There's still some sort of questionable areas that need to be more clarity on. The records, biological records. In fact, I'd asked this question recently because different authorities approach that in different ways. So we have a relationship with the county council that obtains a lot of records, but also we do with the Wildlife Trust that have a record database. That I think is something that's currently under review. Conversations I've had with colleagues around that issue about how that's managed. The council itself doesn't have to be the record-based centre. In fact, my previous authority I worked, I had the lead on ecology there as well, and I had a team of ecologists. We actually had an arrangement with the Hampshire Biological Information Centre, where all the authorities pooled resources together, paid one organisation to give it. We got much better, bigger bang for our bucks, and we had agreements about what level of survey work that they would do and data they would record. So there's different ways of doing it. It doesn't have to be the authority itself that does it, but you do need to have someone that's a repository. So it appears to me that we've got Warwickshire and the Wildlife Trust are the two kind of bodies. But I know colleagues have been talking about reviewing that situation. I can't say any more than that at the moment because I don't know any more myself, but I'm certainly keen to get an answer because, as I said, my background's strongly on ecology, so I've got a good understanding of those areas, those issues. And the Friends of Parks groups are a brilliant resource and a real opportunity to engage local people in not only providing natural surveillance of the area that's close to them, which they care about, but also in terms of helping to secure funding, particularly in these cash-strapped times, local authorities. When I was director of Birmingham, we found the Friends of the Parks groups invaluable in terms of securing resources and funding to do things, to do that extra and engage with communities. So there's certainly opportunities there. I would value those, and I'm pretty sure from my talks with Graham Hood that's certainly an area he's keen to develop further. So it's not, I don't think that's going to be an issue.
Linda, are you happy with that, or you want to come back? You're on mute, Linda.
Sorry, Chair. May I come back on the green donuts on the edge of cities? I'm trying to see how that will balance against government demand for growth in housing and in industry, and how that's being nibbled away at. Because we know now for easing of climate change that we do need a circle around a city to ensure that we have something that cools down the heat that's caused in cities at the moment. I wonder how we balance all that up with the demand for growth, the need for green. Thank you, Chair.
I'd add actually that it shouldn't just focus on the surround of the city, i.e. the green belt. That's clearly a planning issue, and that will come through in planning policy, and the review of the local plan will have to take into account housing demand, and we know in terms of employment locations as well. And then we talk about issues around the gigafactory, for example, which is going to be critical to employment in the future, really important, but also a real opportunity for the city, and it's environmental. So we've got to kind of get a balance between those things. And I think that balance, that process will be discussed and agreed through the planning process in developing the review of the local plan. But I would also add, though, that when you talk about heat island effects in cities and city centres, there's also areas of policy what we could do in the city centre itself, and in terms of the public realm, and the level of planting, and for example, the introduction of green roofs and green walls. All of those things can actually help to cool down the city. So it doesn't have to be concrete city centre surrounded by green. You can actually green the concrete, so to speak. So there's tricks of the trade, and cities now are beginning to see that and realise that a lot more. And if you look at Sheffield, it's got some brilliant examples of how it's used sustainable urban drainage schemes to create green space within very urbanised areas that actually help to cool the city down. So there's lots of approaches that one can adopt to deal with that, and I'd be very keen to see us progress on those areas as well, what we do in the city centre in terms of those spaces.
Okay,
Thank you. Thank you. Through you, Chair, just to be clear, I wasn't only talking about green belt, I'm talking about parks, pocket parks,
yeah,
areas of natural green. So just to be clear on that. Thank you, Chair.
So just to answer on that quickly, we need to have a biodiversity action plan for the city, and that would also look at the relationship between areas and networks and corridors. It's critical with green space, making sure that there's an alignment of joining spaces and that is planned in that way. And that's important, and that informs that's very much relating to planning again, and also Graham in terms of his management of green space.
Thank you, Bret. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I mean, in our local plan, I think there is very little about the climate change, and it's whenever it's up for renewal review, I think we'll ask the cabinet member for housing and planning to look into the climate change issues as well. I've got David's hand up anyway. David.
Yeah, just to comment on, follow on from Linda's comments really, and she'll know from the discussions that I've been having that green spaces in all parts of the city are important, but particularly in our inner city and built up areas that already have, you know, essentially been built over many years. That's certainly a concern I share, and I think under any plan review, following what you've just said, Chair, we will be looking into the local plan, what we can do. But just to put it in context, and I don't want to make this about the local plan, but the government have said that Coventry will have to build more houses. We will have to build more. So at the minute it's 1,230 a year, and it'll be going up to 2,300 a year. Clearly, that puts pressure on the city. We've made representations as a council opposing that, and I made the recommendation that I would review the local plan sooner if the numbers were less, but that is not the way the government have gone. So clearly there's going to be a lot more conversations around what goes on with housing numbers, how our local plan is going to look running up to the planning review period. And that work has started now. So we will be looking at that over the next few months. Sustainability and climate change, we will be considering that as part of the process. And just to say that, our last local plan, it doesn't say much about it, but that's because I don't know if David wants to comment on this, but we were working within the framework that's allowed for us to make a local plan. So clearly it's moved on an awful lot in recent years, and we will be able to make amendments, but it will have to be under a plan review.
Thank you, David. Very helpful. I've got Catherine next. Fire away, Catherine.
Thank you. I think Councillor Bigham and Councillor Welsh have covered quite a lot of what I wanted to talk about. But I think because also the air quality plan and public groundworks and the improvements that Bret spoke about with the greenery on the buildings. But I'd like to really touch on the fact that what you mentioned, Bret, about the work with developers, and I'd like to know what work we're doing to improve tree retention and improve green spaces, because it starts with the developers. And I know that we have to have so many houses and things like that. But some developers, to be fair, want to put a lot of houses or a lot of flats in one place. And that, doesn't help the housing, the green air, and things like that. So what I want to know, Bret, is what kind of work, because I know you're speaking to one of our tree wardens at the moment, and they're very passionate about retention of trees. So what work's going on now with developers and housing associations to keep trees and shrubbery without having it, saying we'll remove it and then we'll replace another tree? So that's basically what I'd like to know. It's really important that we improve our trees and shrubbery around the city, because this all helps. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so I'd actually, if my colleague David Butler's there, might be able to answer that one more better than me. I'm not sure if he's here. He wasn't. He's not sure now. He's here now, is he? No.
Yeah,
I'm here.
Just wondered if you wanted to comment on that one, because you're better placed than me on this particular bit, I think.
No problems at all. So about 6 months ago, we adopted a Tree and Developer Guidelines supplementary planning document, which takes developers through that process of retaining trees on site, and then maps out the exceptional circumstances where we may consider the loss of a tree, and sets out the sort of financial penalties, if you like, through an assessment process called CAVAT. That allows us to then take money for that tree, ensure there's replanting, but also kind of multiplies it out as well. So it's quite a comprehensive process to ensure that trees are retained and obviously encouraged across development sites. And that was one that went out to public consultation. We obviously talked very closely with people like the tree wardens, so they were fully aware of what we were doing and got quite a lot of support for it too.
Thanks, David.
Catherine, are you happy with that?
Well, kind of, Chair, but I'd really like to know how many trees we're looking to plant in our city over the next year, if we have any statistics. Thank you, Chair.
I don't have that to hand, but I'm sure we could get that for you. That's not a problem.
Yeah. But you're right in putting an emphasis on securing the existing mature trees, because they're the 2-for-1 kind of mentioned one often sees is not a replacement of an existing mature tree. In terms from a biodiversity point of view and in terms of carbon fixation point of view, it's a considerable difference between, say, 2 standards and 1 mature tree in terms of the amount of animal wildlife habitat that it provides, but also in terms of the carbon fixation, the biomass that it fixes is considerable. So the aim should always be in preference for preserving existing mature trees wherever possible. That should be what, and I think that is what our stance is in relation to that.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Jim, you wanted to say?
Yeah, just draw committees and actually officers' attention to the fact that the council have a position on this. The cabinet member, the deputy leader of the council, moved a report at full council some time ago where a commitment was made to plant, I think, a tree for every member of the population in the city over a period of years. So that report is available. I don't have it to hand. I don't know the exact number, but it's 350,000 trees or something in the city. So that's there. That's a commitment of the council. And again, rather than us talking about our aspirations, I mean, that is exactly the position of the council as laid out in that report last year, or it might have been 2019, but it's in the last year or so.
Thank you, Jim. I've got Kindy next, and then David Skinner. Kindy.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you for the report, and thanks to the Cabinet members for not only attending but taking the time to contribute and answer questions, etc. I guess for me, as a member of a panel for scrutiny, I found it really difficult to actually scrutinise the documentation that we had been given prior to the meeting. And so I guess one of the things I would like to politely request is that in future, rather than to receive bullet points, which on reading one is not able to ascertain what they actually mean, that we have some form of document that gives the detail. I know that you've given the detail in the meeting, Bret, and others have too, but I am unable to process all of the information in a meeting. And if I have it beforehand, I can prepare and consider the questions that I may like to ask and prioritise during the meeting. And I'd like to counter any argument that comes back to me that this is a lot of information, then I would again politely and respectfully request that the documents perhaps are sectioned according to what you think are the priority. I would like to also request that actually what we've heard today is obviously great stuff that's happening or going to happen. I heard a lot of phrases like could be, potential, opportunities. What I don't have a sense of is not only what is our strategic vision, but what is the plan here? So what are the things that we are doing now? What are the things that we hope to do over the next year? And what would be the impact in terms of CO2 emissions? So I can get, and I'm sure other panel members will agree with me, can get a sense of where we're heading and what we've managed to achieve. Because from what I'm hearing from all of the Cabinet members and yourselves is that we are achieving a lot, but I don't see that as actually a plan that I can view and review. I'd also like to ask that a lot has been said about the kind of big projects like construction, roads, cycle paths, etc. So my question is, what exactly is the community engagement? There's an analogy here with the COVID, right? The great and the good got round and together and developed a great vaccine. However, there's certain demographics within our community that are choosing or not able to access that vaccine. And we can use the same analogy, for example, like cycle paths. Yeah, the cycle path in Fossil. Do you know which demographic groups may choose to use the cycle path or not? Because I know that certain gender, like women, for example, may not choose, of a particular ethnic group, may not choose to cycle down Fossil Road. Also, Coventry has a third of its community is black and minority ethnic. So there is a lot of diasporic heritage. So has that been considered? So part of the diasporic experience, if you like, is that we come from poverty. We come from a legacy of poverty, from countries the other side of the world, where people experienced hunger every day, didn't have access to school every day, for example. So coming to this country or living in a Western country where you still have connections the other side of the world and where the standard of living is very different, then the mark of success, if you like, of being in a country like the UK is material wealth, for example. So driving a 4x4 is a show of that success, whereas huffing and puffing up Warwick Road on a bicycle, like I often do, is not a mark of that success. So I guess, again, what I'm asking for is a view of what we're doing in terms of community engagement and the equality impact assessment of the work that we're doing.
Are you finished, Candy?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Before Bret answers the question, I would like to clarify 2 points. This is not the first time that Scrutiny Board received, a member of the Scrutiny Board received the presentation slides, and then the officer actually gave the presentation with more detail in the meeting. This is not the first time, Candy. And secondly, the cycle path you mentioned in Folesville, I don't think so. They are being built just for the people of Folesville. There is a lot of other area around it. So cycle path is maybe just coming through the Folesville. It's not just being built for the people of Folesville. Bret, so
can I come back on that, Naeem?
Yeah.
I'm not suggesting that the cycle path is only built and only considered. What I am asking is that we are part of this climate change agenda has to be about behaviour change, and we have to bring communities with us, right? And we know that, for example, disproportionately, the most marginalised used public transport, for example. So if you live in a community in Fossil, Longford, etc., and you see a cycle path down your road, then how are we making sure that whatever we build, whatever we try and do, we are making sure the most marginalised in our communities have access and benefit from what we're trying to do. Yes, and that's my kind of main point here.
Okay. Yeah. Well, let's see what Jim says. Jim's hands up. Jim.
Is it Jim or Bret that should respond?
Yeah.
What I'll do, if you don't mind, Chair and Kindy, I'll let Bret talk about the specifics, because what Kindy's raised, very valid points around issues of poverty and the impact that people have in relation to their access both to services and to good jobs and education, but also to housing. And I think that was touched on earlier. This is a massive wide issue. But the question I wanted to answer specifically was, I did say right at the outset that Coventry at the moment is working on its new climate change strategy. We're not yet in a position to publish that. And as part of that, clearly it will have a number of targets. And why do I say that? Because the first climate change strategy, which was published in 2012, set a target to reduce carbon dioxide emissions by 27.5% by the year 2020. Coventry achieved that in 2014, and there will be facts and figures to show and to prove that, and data to show that. We need to have that. That's one aspect of clearly a measurable target in impact that people can measure and can actually look at. The other point to make is colleagues will know the West Midlands Combined Authority have a target of carbon zero by 2041. And of course, nationally, the government did have a target of carbon zero by 2050. Well, of course, Boris Johnson just announced the other day that they were bringing that forward to 2035. And clearly we have to factor all of that information in to the wider strategy, because Coventry is not an island, it doesn't stand alone. And there's all of those factors we have to feed into that. So that's a huge question. And clearly it's important that we have the ability for both councillors, but also the public, to understand what the targets are and how they can be measured and how we can ultimately be accountable for that. But this isn't the council on its own. That's the point I really want to make really strongly. We can lead on it, but it's not us alone. And I'll just make that point.
Bret, would you like to answer the other question?
Yes, thank you, Councillor. That's key, actually. The impact I said earlier at the beginning is we're about 1%. So it's actually how we mobilise the other organisations, and developing a commission is to get. It's not just the great and good, but it's organisations that have got resources and capacity to make a difference, and they have an impact in their own right on the city. So it's to get them to change the way they do business, and for us to work collaboratively with them. We do measure impacts as best as we can. So we're using CPD, the Carbon Disclosure Programme, CDP, and we got the rating that we've got. One of the things, there's 3 areas that it comes in. It comes in Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3. Scope 1 and 2 are kind of more like the direct energy uses, but Scope 3 we're finding is very significant. It's all the other things that we do, so things we purchase or activities that are indirect consequences of things which we do, and they're significant, and we're measuring those and improving the robustness at which we're doing that. So we're incorporating so that the detail that comes in is greater each year as we progress. So I know this year's report is far more detailed than the previous year in terms of Scope 3, and we're working on that further. What it does reveal is that we actually got more work to do, because we're obviously identifying areas of impact. Now, for us, it's about when we showed the climate view presentation I just showed you, one of the things is actually how do we measure impact a policy on effect in terms of CO2 reduction? It's incredibly difficult to do, and that's one of the reasons why we're working with the 4 other authorities on this particular issue, with some colleagues from Sweden who've been working with Swedish and German cities. So we're trying to learn from their experience, and they're all having difficulties doing that, and includes things. So some of my conversations, for example, is around how do we monitor actual usage of cycle routes and their uptake, and how can we know the numbers when they're used, etc. What kind of technology or remote sensing can we use that will give us that information? So it's things like that. And behaviour change, I couldn't agree with you more. And I'm currently working with Warwick and Coventry University on trying to put forward a proposal to develop exactly a thing which will involve literally across both university faculty, all their faculties across both universities, working with private sector and community to look at issues around behaviour change. And in fact, the one example I've given when I've talked to them is around cycling, and how do we encourage people to ride bikes? Because yes, there are those social indicator issues that you just mentioned, things that they're not particularly attractive. They don't raise your social profile. But why? Because that's how culture and society have kind of reflected that. How do we change that so it's a more positive view? So, and in conversations with West Midlands Combined Authority, they have very clearly, we have raised that issue, and they are currently they're appointing the innovation unit in London. And it was an organisation I was aware of, and I mentioned to them, I know some outfit that could be really helpful in terms of looking at these behavioural measures, And they said, that's the one we're talking to, that's the one we're to hopefully deal with. So we recognise that things like behavioural change are really big, really significant across the whole region, and it requires a kind of a collective effort. And that is one of the areas where there is a kind of agreement across all the authorities around looking at that. So that is a big task, and it's a big ask, and how we move that forward is going to be key. And I think we will need to focus on things like use of cycling and routes. So an example of something like that, which actually I was doing when I was working in Eastleigh, we developed initiatives that helped young mothers gain confidence to cycle with their toddlers. And we introduced some training, worked with Sustrans, and within the week, all the courses were booked. We suddenly realised we'd hit a rich vein of interest. And as a consequence, in fact, that particular target group did cycling in the parks and then actually started cycling on the street and reported back around, confidence. And of course, that's also about then confidence for their children getting into a habit of cycling from very early age. Now, I come from a family. I lived in London where I actually didn't cycle. And I've actually got the testament of that. I'm not a very good cyclist. So.
Okay. Right.
But it's that sort of thing where we're focusing on very much, Kindy, around the behaviour.
Kindy, you want to come back?
Yeah, I do. I mean, it's good to hear, and I appreciate the grace with which both you and Jim have received my comment, and I look forward to this strategy. We do see every day in the news, etc., about the impact of CO2 emissions, etc. And I think it is important that we try and gauge where we can, although I accept that it's difficult. And I just want to emphasise, even this commission, to have some community involvement in that. And I know that you've mentioned Sustrans, but actually there's a woman who grew up and born and brought up in Coventry, runs a project in Scotland, which is again having to ensure that marginalised communities access the outdoors. And she started as a cycling project for women wearing burqas, etc. And now she's got projects where they're abseiling and all sorts of things like that. So my plea is that we go to the community groups in Coventry, because they are the ones who are closest to the community, and ask them about the barriers. And I accept that you can go to Warwick and you can go to Coventry and all these other outfits, etc. And they are not undermining their expertise, etc. But don't forget the expertise within the community. And I guess that's my plea. Communities, whether they're supporting young mothers or whether they're supporting older residents to go walking, etc. These are all valuable communities that have lots of local knowledge that can, and we've had to do that with the vaccine, rollout, etc. So let's not make the same mistake with the climate change.
Okay, thank you, Kindy. I've got David Skinner. Councillor Skinner has been waiting very patiently. David.
No need for a long discussion, Chair. One, dealing with social landlords. Clearly, social landlords should lead the way in this. It must be at least 7 years. When I was a non-executive director of Whitefriars, now Citizen, voted for extra cladding on a whole range of buildings. That was done 6 or 7 years ago. I would expect all housing authorities to join in. Second point, as a reference to Coventry Action Anchor Group, I was on page 23, slightly surprised to see that. Could anybody elucidate on that, expand on that? Thirdly, what above all are we doing about publicity? How are we getting the message of the importance of these issues across to the public in Coventry? Thank you.
The Anchor Group is linked with the Deputy Chief Exec, Gail Quintin, is working with that group. It's, I think, involves the universities, a number of key organisations within the city. I think Hospitals Trust is in there as well. and they've been looking at things which they can work together on. And one of the things that they focused on quite strongly is around climate change and sustainability. So clearly, it's a useful indication that as we've discovered from discussions that we've been having with various organisations, that there's an interest there and likely to be participation from them in those areas. So yeah, that's positive. The landlords issue is a real one, and it's just to see what the solutions could be and what the incentives there are. Some years ago, you would have gone to an RSL, the Regeneration landlords, and you would have encountered, there would have been an energy management professional in the organisation. In fact, when you make approaches now to a lot of those organisations, they don't have anyone with that background or experience within the organisation anymore. Some of it actually relates to the cladding issue. In fact, they've responded to the problem with the problems that we've had with the cladding, and have dealt with the health and safety focus more than the energy management focus. So there are issues around that and where that moves in the future.
Thank you for that. I've got Catherine next. Catherine.
Thank you, Chair.
Could I come back on the third
Yeah,
question?
of course,
I'm
David.
sorry.
Yeah.
What are we doing about publicising these issues to the public of Coventry?
Yes, publicity. Yes, that's something in my team. I got 2 members of staff who have some relationship to that issue. I've got Annie Tron, who's linked with the RESO project, and Denise, who is working with the Green business team. So she's been doing a lot of work with the private sector in terms of engaging them in information, as so is Annie. We are in contact with our comms team around, and it's Darren O'Shaughnessy kind of leads that side, but we're also talking to them around what we can do. It's certainly an area that we can do a lot more on. And again, it's a resource constraint, isn't it? So we can do with what we're trying to maximize what we do with the resource we have. And the other element of that is which is really important, is what we do with the City of Culture, because they of course are engaging with communities and with programs, and we're trying to make sure that they have a sustainability and environmental focus to them, so that we hopefully use that as a resource as well to help with communications. But yeah, certainly it's an area that needs focus and emphasis.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, David. Catherine.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to touch on what Kindy had said. In Lowestoft, we have at least 4 or 5 residents groups. One in particular in the area, like in Stoke-Aldermore, there's a difference of like 20 different languages. And they are such a tight community, and they're working on the green issues and the environmental issues. So I can honestly say that this kind of thing is working, and I have to, give props to our officers, especially in the recycling champions, Paul Spain and Dave Lewis. They have all been working with like Gosford Park, Stoke Park residents, and like I said, down in we've got 5 different groups within one group in Stoke-Aldermore, and they are really working effectively to have a look at all the issues that impact on all of the different languages and cultures within there. So I know that we are doing some good work with officers, and I felt I just had to say that, Chair.
Thank you, Catherine. Any other members got any question? I'm conscious of time as well. Quickly, if you want to ask anything. No. So we move on to recommendation then. It's on page 4. Scrutiny Coordination Committee recommended to consider the content of the presentation at Appendix 1. Identify any further recommendation for appropriate cabinet members. Jenny and Vicky are busy taking the note in the background. Jenny or Vicky, can you read out, please, the additional recommendation we.
Okay, so one of the recommendations that we've got is that the impact of climate change is taken into consideration when the local plan is reviewed.
Mm-hmm.
The other one that we have is around an action to circulate the figures of the reduction from emissions from council buildings, and also for officers to feedback on the discussions about targets for active travel and how many trees are likely to be planted, targets for tree planting. I'm not sure if there was any more.
Yeah, there is another one. If members are agreed that we would recommend to the leader of the council to add climate change into the portfolio of job and regeneration, if members are agreed, because majority of the climate change issues covered by this portfolio. Jim?
It's already in my portfolio, Naeem.
But it's saying job and regeneration. It doesn't say climate change. If it is, that's fine.
Sustainability and climate change is my responsibility under the agreement that we agree at our AGM every year. So
that's fine. If it is,
Yeah.
that's fine.
Absolutely.
Okay. So are the member happy with the recommendations Jenny read out?
Can I just ask about my request to, in future, have a kind of a plan once the strategy is done, that we have something that kind of sets out over a period of time what
You
the
mean
plan is, if you like.
Progress report in maybe in 6 months' time, like that?
Okay.
Is that okay? This is what you want to say?
Well, it was something really to kind of, because a lot of what we've heard is really good work, but I don't have a, I felt that we didn't have a sense of kind of what's being done over the next year and what's been done over 2 years, etc. And I accept what Jim said before he said they're looking at a strategy, etc. But I do feel that next time we do have some sort of report, that there should be some indication of timelines. So, for example, with the RESO project, for example, something that gives us an indication that what's happening over what period of time.
Bret, have you got it?
Yeah, I've
I
got
think
it.
to help, Chair, clearly the strategy will lay out our strategy over a period of years, and it'll have targets there. And of course, it's for Scrutiny and anybody else to oversee that and to come back with further questions and recommendations going forward. I'm absolutely certain about that, and that's why I made the point around the if you like, the rules on this are somewhat changing as we move, because the national picture appears to be changing as well, and that wasn't something that was taken into account when this was started. So clearly that is something we will have to do, and so that's a given, and clearly we want. I mean, I'll just make this point, this wider point, colleagues, because it is important. As I said, and it says it right at the outset, this is about partnership, both as a city, but as a country. We can't do this on our own. You can't do this individually. It requires, the input of every single one of us, one way or another. And the big ticket items are expensive, and that is why you have to bring, the levers of government to really make it happen and work. And that's what we will do, and that's what it will set out. But clearly, there's an element of bringing people along with you, and that is run through. All of us who are on this meeting are all elected and accountable to our electors in our particular wards. And I would hope, and we'll work with colleagues to make sure that people are as well informed as they possibly can be as the strategy comes to reality.